Welcome to my pack. I am Alpha Celeste Chaos, she said, whilst extending her hands to greet the Alpha and his Beta, who responded with their names. Alpha River. The Alpha responded, Beta Matthews. His Beta responded, good. Well, the rest will introduce themselves. Then we can go inside. I'm Lucas Chaos, and this is my brother Lucian. My oldest brother introduced him and his twin to the Alpha and Beta, with a handshake each. With the blank mask on my face, I reached out to shake the Alpha's hand only to feel tingles shooting up my hands. I looked up to face him, only to have my wolf Havoc scream out the one word I knew would shatter my peaceful life. Mate. How I had not smelled him before shocked me. I tried to fish for a scent only to come up empty. That rose my suspicions as to why he kept his scent cloaked. The shock that rushed through me broke my blank facade before hurriedly putting it back in place again. I took a brief moment to study his physique, and to say I wasn't impressed and oddly aroused would be a blatant lie. The man was packed with muscles in the right places. The Alpha, though, stood still with my hand locked in his. As he watched me in silence, he didn't even show any reaction that I was his mate. Hell, his eyes only flashed for a second to show his wolf's presence before it was gone. Clearing my throat softly, I took every emotion out of my voice before I spoke. My name is KD Chaos, but you only call me Chaos, I said coldly before pulling my hand out of the Alpha's hand and moving on to shake his Beta's hand, who continued to watch me closely. The rest of the introductions followed, and soon we were all moving to the PAX conference room to discuss the purpose of the Silver River PAX visit. I am seated opposite the Alpha of said pack, and he hasn't taken his eyes off of me along with his creepy Beta, and it was starting to piss me off. Turning to look at my mother at the head of the table, I shook my head curtly as she jumped straight into the matters of the meeting. I swear that woman doesn't know how to even sweet-talk someone or grovel to get something. She's always blunt, which I appreciate in cases like this, as she called out the Alpha and his Beta to stop staring at me like a piece of meat. What happened next was like a chain reaction and a display of typical Alpha behavior, as the Alpha let out a spine-shivering growl in his Beta's direction before he was thrown from his seat into a nearby wall. Some moved from their seats, whilst my mother watched on with boredom before I guessed something clicked in her mind, because she turned towards me and narrowed her eyes at me. I avoided her gaze, causing to yell through our mind link for me to explain myself. When I refused to answer, she turned to Alpha River and asked bluntly, Alpha River, is there a reason why my conference room is being used as a boxing arena, or is this kind of game common between you and your Beta? If that is so, then we can show you where our training grounds are so you could continue. This snapped the said Alpha out of his trance with an embarrassed smile, tugging at the corners of his lips before vanishing whiles the rest of us tried to stifle our laughter. My mother's bluntness knows no bounds. Clearing his throat, he turned to look at me and chuckled softly, when he probably saw that I was trying to evade his gaze before turning to my mother and saying what I wished he hadn't said. Well, you see, Alpha Celeste Chaos, here happens to be my mate, and I just don't get why she is trying to act like I am not. A sharp retort was on the tip of my tongue, but before I could respond, my mother was already on it. Mama Alpha chuckled softly whilst my stupid brothers laughed. My mother opened her mouth to talk, all the while taunting me through our mind link. Well, forgive my daughter. She's weird that way. It makes me wonder at times if perhaps I dropped her unknowingly during her childhood, or her father may have done that when I wasn't looking. Well, she'll come around. She always does, she said bluntly, and rather seriously, causing me to stare at her in shock, while screaming at her through our mind link, which she responded by laughing with my stupid brothers, joining in. Those in the conference room tried to hide their laughter behind coughs and throat-clearing whiles Mr. Alpha was smiling smugly. And his Beta was full-blown laughing. Rolling my eyes at them, I pushed my chair back and walked out of the room to pack up, knowing I will be leaving with my mate whether I liked it or not, now that he has found me. After packing, I took opportunity of the time I had left to go around the pack one more time and to tell the few pack members I considered as friends and family goodbye. Now that I was leaving, I will surely miss my training with the warriors and brothers, as well as my mothers. I wish I could stay a bit longer before going to my mate's pack, but even I know that even in my dreams, it will be impossible because my mate wouldn't agree and will throw a tantrum or resort to other means no matter how low to get me to go with him, which wouldn't really be necessary, and to avoid all that, I just have to go with him peacefully. But if he thinks he has got himself a fragile, docile mate, then he has got another thing come. I may not talk much, but my silence and temper does show a lot. I had just finished collecting my personal weapons, which consisted of a silver sword, a bow, and a couple dozens of arrows, and my box of daggers from the weapons room, when I felt someone pushing against the barrier around my mind link. Sighing softly, I let it down only to hear my mother calling for me. "What is it, Mum?" I asked. "It's time, honey," she said solemnly. "Okay, I'm coming," I said before, closing the mind link. Taking a last look around the room, I lifted the sack that now contained my weapons and walked out of the room. I walked into the main entrance into my home, only to find my packed suitcases near the door, and my family chatting animatedly with creepy beta Wiles. Alpha River stood near the window, staring off in a distance with a thoughtful look on his face. Clearing my throat rather loudly, I made my presence known. My mother approached me first, and after wrapping her arms around me, she opened our mind link to speak to me. "I love you, honey. Take care when you go, and know that you can call me any time, and I will answer. I love you too, Mum." "We love you too, baby sis." My brothers barged in. "I love you." More idiots. When my mum pulled back, my brothers came in for a hug too, trying to squeeze the life out of me, but they didn't succeed for long because they were swiftly pulled back by Mr. Possessive Alpha, and I was cuddled into a warm, tingling chest that sent delicious shivers down my spine. I burrowed further into his chest, trying to get more of that warm, tingling sensation, and completely forgetting that we had an audience. I could feel the mate bond blooming and strengthening with just this cuddle. It wrapped itself around me like a warm blanket, and I'm sure my mate was feeling it too, because Alpha River tightened his hand wrapped around me and buried his face into my neck, breathing in my scent, whilst he kept trying to push me much further into his arms, but was stopped by the sack of weapons I still in between us in my arms. He pulled back in confusion to check what was hindering me from getting closer to him. With one arm around me, he tugged my sack of weapons with his other hand. "What is this?" he asked softly. My weapons," I whispered back, softly, not wanting to break the moment. "Weapons? You train?" he asked in awe. "Yes," I said with pride. He was about to say something when my mother cleared her throat rather loudly, reminding us that we had an audience, to which I blushed furiously into Alpha River's chest. To prevent further embarrassment, I put on a blank mask on my face before turning to face my family and the creepy beta, who was smiling rather smugly, whilst wiggling his eyebrows at me. Rolling my eyes at him, I threw my sack of weapons at him, to which he caught with a grunt. "What the hell is in this sack? Stones or what? Lazy bastard." "They're human heads," I said, sarcastically, before turning around to leave the room with Alpha River's hand still wrapped tightly around my waist. We stepped out of the house and headed straight for the car he came in. Opening the front door for me, he helped me settle in my seat, and after leaning over to clip my seatbelt in place, and he dropped a soft kiss on my forehead. Rounding the car to the driver's side, he settled in his seat, and after buckling up, he started the car. As soon as my family and the rest of pack had come out in the open, and I had said my final goodbyes, Alpha River peeled out of our compound, with the rest of his entourage following behind. The ride to his pack was a rather comfortable one, though we were both silent. I must have dozed off because I was shaken awake only to realize we were at his pack's border. I smiled softly, knowing how he knew me within a short span of time. I didn't want to enter his pack for the first time sleeping. He shook his head softly with a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips, as if he knew exactly what was going on in my mind. Rolling my eyes at him, I quickly fixed myself, and after checking the side mirror and making sure I was all right, I gave him a curt nod to signify that he could go on. We drove into his pack grounds, and I could already see people gathered there waiting, and I got my answer when I saw their creepy beta standing with the entourage that came to me, Pack smiling smugly in my direction. I swear one of these days I am going to beat him into submission. I may be a female, but I still have alpha blood flowing through my veins, and even if he chose to disregard that, I was going to be his Luna, for crying out loud. He should show some respect, but no. In the short time that he has known me, he has already made a habit of smiling smugly at me and teasing me any chance he got with his actions and expressions. I wonder what sort of things he would utter once he opens that mouth of his. Ignoring him, I waited till Alpha River parked the car and killed the engine before pulling a blank mask onto my face. I realized now that we were on his pack ground that I could smell his scent, and it was soothing and distractive. He smelled of sandalwood and mint with a dash of ocean breeze. My wolf was purring inside, wanting to be let out to get a better whiff of our mate's alluring smell. Taking a deep breath, I opened my door and stepped out only to be met with Alpha River's disapproving gaze. I smirked at him before schooling my face behind my oh-so-precious loving blank mask. With a firm hand on my waist, he propelled me forward, towards where his pack members were gathered. I kept my head and spine straight with my eyes straight forward as we walked towards the entrance of the pack house. It was amusing how some females like underestimating other females and think they are better than them. In my opinion, let the men do it and put them to shame by proving them wrong. But when you are a woman, and you do that, you just disgust me. Just like now when I am walking towards the pack house and some bitches together with some assholes who just can't keep their mouth shut and their ugly disturbing thoughts to themselves. It was amusing just listening to them, whisper forgetting we have super sensitive ears and I can hear them. She looks beautiful. A timid voice said, "Look at that bitch. She thinks she is better than us." A whiny, irritating voice said, "Yes, Belle. You are right, just look at her." Another whiny, irritating voice agreed with her. "You girls just shut up. You are just jealous she is Luna, and you are not. I guess your so-called oracle lied to you." Yet again, a rather warm voice said before bursting into laughter, "Damn, look at that body, man. She is not even naked and I'm already getting hard." An overconfident male voice said, "Nah, I don't need to look at that body, man. Am comfortable just looking at her hips and ass. I would so tap that any day, any time, and anywhere." Another male overconfident voice replied, "Stupid bastards, don't know when someone is taken and when they are not. You see a woman on your alpha's arms and you start ogling at her." A timid male voice murmured so lowly that if you didn't strain your ears, you wouldn't hear. "Wow! Look at that lady, she is so beautiful. Mama, I want to mate like her when I grow up," a little boy said to his mother in an overexcited voice. I was brought out of my eavesdropping when a warm body bounded into me. I knew it was a female because of the large mop of hair on top of her head and wrapped her arms around me. I awkwardly pat her back before moving away and taking a cautious step back. Clearing my throat softly, I turned to look at Alpha River, who smiled softly at me before mouthing sorry, to which I nodded curtly before turning my attention back to the grown woman, who was smiling rather warmly at me. It was so infectious that I couldn't resist. So, I let a small smile slip onto my face before replying, "Hi, ma'am. Hey, you. No need for formalities. Just call me Felicia. I'm this grumpy man's mother, and trust me, he didn't take after me. It's all on his father. Well, come on in, and I warmly welcome you to this pack. Thanks, ma'am. Sorry, Felicia. Don't worry, dear. So, what should I call you? Chaos. My name is Chaos. Ooh, Celeste's daughter. That woman is a hard nut to crack. I knew your father, too. Am sorry for your loss, honey. It must have been hard, right? Turning to look at Alpha River, who had a grimace and apologetic look on his face, I shook my head before clearing the small smile on my face. I turned back to Felicia, and I couldn't help the hard edge that came with my words. My father really is a touchy subject. No, it wasn't because my father isn't dead. He may be in this world, but from where I come from, he isn't. Felicia. It was nice to meet you, but if you would excuse me, I would like to have a word in private with Alpha River, I said before walking round her and into the house. I followed Alpha River's scent, and it sent me straight to a rather warm room on the last floor. Letting my mask fall, I sat on the bed and allowed the tears I was holding back to fall. My father has always been a touchy subject for me. Though I see him from time to time, it doesn't make up for the time I missed with him during my childhood. I understand why he had to leave, but it just hurts so much whenever it is brought up. No one understands the pain I feel except my family and my father himself. I just wish I had a longer time with him. I was still crying, letting my heart bleed the only way I knew, when I felt a pair of warm arms wrap around me. By the tingling sensations I felt, I knew it was my mate. Burying my face further into his chest, I let it all loose. I wept like I had never before, and he just sat there and comforted me without any questions, for which I was grateful. Ever since I found my mate, I just wanted to cuddle her and smother her with kisses. She may have that tough aura around her, or that annoying blank mask on her face all the time, but I and my wolf Caden just wanted to treat her like she was the frailest being we've ever set our sights on, but I knew she wouldn't want that. Maybe in private, but not in public. As soon as we had arrived on their pack ground, I smelled her. It took everything in me to not have sniffed her out and mated with her that very instant. I noticed the realization when she felt the tingles, and the moment she tried to get a whiff of my scent. Too bad I had it cloaked. I saw the suspicions and mistrust that reared their heads and the shooting up of her guard. Intuitive and cautious. I'm impressed. I glanced at her outfit and thought she was dressed simple and decked in all black. I couldn't help but feel hot and bothered. The dress code together with the stance she held and the look on her face had me growing hard, and Caden was not helping at all. She made sure to draw my attention to the fullness of her breast, even though they were hidden under her shirt. The wideness of her hips showed she was very ripe for childbearing, and with a tilt of my head, I got a glimpse of her ass. Rounded and firm in those tight black jeans, I felt like the luckiest wolf on earth. I've got the full package even though it came a little too late, but she was my mate, and I will find a solution around her finding out my little secret. Throughout the meeting, I just couldn't take my eyes off her. She sparked a light, a softer part of me that I didn't know existed till now. One look at her though, and I knew she would not be submissive unless she wanted to, and give me trouble as well as be trouble herself. She wouldn't take my shit as well as anybody else's. We could work through that. But what I am most grateful to the moon goddess and fate for is the fact that she didn't take after her mother's bluntness, because honestly, that woman didn't have a damn filter. While driving now to my pack, I couldn't help but enjoy the scent of my mate that filled my senses. She didn't have the regular female scents which were strange but refreshing. She smelt like freshly rained on soil, with a dash of the after the smell of burning, but it was comfortable and soothing to my wolf, who wanted nothing more than to sink his canines into her and mark her there and then. If you think I am possessive, then you haven't met my wolf yet, because he is on a whole different level of possessiveness that you wouldn't know existed until you've met him. I pulled up on my pack grounds, and automatically the cloaking on my scent vanished. I smiled inwardly when it reached my mate, and she sighed with content, But before I could round the car and open her door, she was already out. I couldn't help the scowl that marred my face and the smirk she flashed. Me told me she was riling me up on purpose, but it didn't cease to cool me down. Not with Kaiden yipping and growling in my head to mark and mate her. With a firm hand on her waist, I propelled her forward and watched in amazement as she straightened her spine and head, which made her a tad bit intimidating. Even to me, it showed she wasn't to be messed with, and that had Kaiden howling with pride. He was proud to have a mate that could hold her own fort, but then his thoughts turned dirty. The picture of our mate putting someone in their place or training had me growing a hard-on. But before Kaiden could cause me any further embarrassment, I shut him off and started thinking of all other things to kill my raging hard-on. The image of Chaos's mother threatening me to take care of her only daughter, or else she would come over to my pack and castrate me in public. Did it for me. I was soft and shriveled in a split second. That woman is scary, and the thought of that very moment sent shivers down my spine. She had threatened me heatedly, and then smiled brightly afterward, as if what she had just said was nothing but a joke, but I knew better. Sunday. The squealing of my mother as she runs out the door towards my mate brought me out of my thoughts. But before I could interfere, she was already on Chaos and hugging the life out of her. I watched with a grimace as she squeezed her tightly as if to drain her life essence out of her. And all I could do was stand by whiles, sending her an apologetic gaze as she turned to look at me. My mother being my mother went right ahead and talked her ears off whiles the rest of us watched on in amusement. Because my mate seemed to be caught up in her web, but then I knew my mother had crossed some sort of line when she mentioned my mate's father, and the small smile on my mate's face vanished, only for it to be replaced with her everyday annoying cold mask. Her next words sent chills to my heart and seemed to snap my mum out of her obliviousness and notify her that she had crossed some sort of line. But before she could apologize, my mate had already left, and I couldn't help but follow her. I followed her scent, which led me to my room surprisingly. But I wasn't ready for the sight I was met with when I entered my room. It literally broke my heart. I could feel the unbridled pain, sorrow, and longing rolling off of her in massive waves. Chaos sat on my bed, weeping so hard that it had Kaiden howling in sorrow. It broke my heart that such a strong person could break down like this. She didn't need me to ask questions, so I didn't. I sat beside her and wrapped my arms around her. I knew that was what she needed when she buried her face into my chest. I held her for how long she needed, and before I realized it, she was fast asleep. Dropping a soft kiss on her forehead, I lifted her into my arms and walked around the bed before depositing her on one side of the bed. I made quick work of taking off her shoes, and inasmuch as I would have loved to undress her and see her naked, I knew she was in a vulnerable state and didn't want to worsen it by taking advantage of it. She would never trust me enough to let her guard down around me again, and I didn't want that. I was tucking her into bed when a knock sounded on my door. Already sensing who was behind it, I called out for the person to enter. My mother walked in with a sad, guilty look on her face. Is she all right? I didn't mean to hurt her. I'm sorry. Smiling softly, I walked towards her, and after giving her a comforting hug, I said, I know, Mum. You didn't know, and I know Chaos knows that too. She is resting, and I'm going to stay with her, and then if it is not too late by the time she wakes up, we will come down and see you, so she can assure you herself. Promise. Yes, Mum. I promise. With a nod and one last glance at Chaos, she quickly walked out the door. I followed behind and locked the door before stripping down to my boxers. I dropped my clothes inside the laundry basket before getting into bed beside her. But after lying beside her for a couple of minutes and not being able to rest, I gently pulled her into my arms, swiftly inhaling her scent, causing my tensed muscles to unwind, and before long, I was drifting off to sleep. I am awakened by the sun blaring rudely in my face. Which fucker left the damn window open? I would really like to know and give that person a delightful piece of my mind. It's not like I hated the sun, but it is in my face rudely, and I am not a morning person. I try to move only to realize I am being held tight to a chest. I mean, a very yummy muscular chest by a muscular arm. I look up only to be met with the adorable sleeping face of my mate. Ugh. Sleep really does stuff to people. He looks so angelic, but you and I both know he is nothing like that. I throw my head back on my pillow as the events of last night rushed back to me. I felt bad for walking out on Alpha River's mum and pack, but I couldn't help it. My father is a touchy subject, and I didn't like the idea of someone talking about him as if they really knew what he was or where he was. It is a guarded secret that his children, mate, and a few select people and council elders of my birth pack will take to their graves. He may be dead to the world, but he wasn't dead to me and our family, and I won't take it from anyone who thinks otherwise. I was clearing my mind when I heard people moving to what I guessed as the training grounds at this time of the morning. Gently grabbing my pillow, I swiftly moved from under Alpha River's arm before replacing my body with the pillow. With a soft kiss on his forehead, I rushed to the washroom where I quickly brushed my teeth and pulled my hair into a loose bun before going to take a leak, and that is when I realized I was still in yesterday's clothing. Quickly shrugging out of them, I dropped them in the laundry basket before looking around for my suitcases. I found them all right, but they were empty. I opened the second door after the washroom door only to find out it led to a rather extravagant walk-in closet. I walked further into it and was amazed to find my clothes arranged just how I liked them. Color coordinated, though they are not that many colors to put them in. My clothes come in specific colors such as black, white, gray, ash, maroon, and dark red. I hate bright stuff. I quickly searched for my black training gear, and as soon as I found them, I tugged them on before pulling on my favorite combat boots to finish my look. After checking my outfit and liking what I saw, my tattoos out for display and making me look sinfully sexy and intimidating, I tiptoed out of the room so as to not disturb Alpha River. I closed the door and turned only to be met with the creepy beta seizing me up and down like a piece of meat. Having had enough, I drew a fist and socked him heavily in the jaw and smiled when I heard the satisfying crack of his jaw breaking. Taking a step closer to him, I lifted his head up so he could meet my eyes and said, "I may be a woman, but I would not let you disrespect me. Look at me like that again, and I will make sure you never see anything else for the rest of your life again. Are we clear?" "Crystal." "I'm sorry, Luna," the beta replied with his eyes cast down in shame. "You better be. Where were you going?" "To wake Alpha up. It's time for training." "Yes. I know, but he is sleeping. Let him. I will be supervising the training today." I may have surprised the beta because his head snapped back up to look at me, and it was amusing. The way his eyes widened with shock, so much that he stammered out, Really? "Yes, Matthews. Now let's go. Lead the way." We turned only to realize we had an audience. I recognized the men as the entourage that came to my former home. I saw some staring at me with shock and admiration, which I'm sure was because of my tattoos, because it took a lot of courage and wit to get one not to talk about the thousands scattered all over my arms and chest whiles. Some looked outrightly intimidated. Good. I may be a bitch, but I was nobody's bitch. With a curt nod of my head as a greeting in their direction, to which they responded with verbal morning greetings before falling in tow after me as the Matthews led the way to the training grounds. We walked in silence towards the training ground, but before we could take a turn into it, I heard the same whiny voice that bitched about me yesterday. "Alpha is late for training for the first time today. Am pretty sure it's because of that ugly bitch he came with yesterday. That bitch looks like all she can do is roll in the sheets with Alpha and look pretty." Before Matthews and the others could react, I raised a hand and signaled for them to stay put just before we heard another warm voice say, "Just shut up, Cindy. You are just jealous." Shaking my head, I squared my shoulders and straightened my spine before walking forward into the training grounds. The whole place fell quiet so much that you could hear pin drop as I and my entourage made way to the front, where a rather buff man stood chatting animatedly with a young lad. Matthews stopped in front of him and moved to the side so I was directly in front of the buff man. Clearing his throat rather noisily, he caught the man's attention. The buff man turned only to cuss out. "What the fuck happened to your face, Matthews?" he asked with genuine concern. Matthew peeked a glance at me and gulped when he found me staring heatedly at him. Sighing softly, he whispered, "I disrespected Luna this morning, and she thumped me in the jaw." The buff man turned to face me with wide eyes and back to Matthews before chuckling softly. "Well, I will be damned. Pleased to meet you, Luna. I am Jeremiah Montego, the Delta and head warrior, and this is my mate Stephanie," he said whilst nodding in the direction of the beautiful, bashful woman that stood beside him before reaching out to shake my hand. Meeting him halfway, I clasped my hand into this, and after a very firm handshake, I answered softly, "The pleasure is all mine. My name is Chaos, and it's nice to meet you and your mate." I turned to face his mate, who was smiling softly but shyly at me. I returned it with a small smile of my own to put her at ease around me. "I love your tattoos, Luna. They are beautiful," she said quietly. "Why, thank you, Stephanie. But trust me, they hurt like a bitch, but I can't complain now. It was worth it." "Don't try to get one. It fucking hurts," I answered rather seriously, as I remembered my plight causing them to laugh. "Where's Alpha, Luna?" Jeremiah asked. "He's sleeping, but I will be in charge of training today. I want to see what I will be working with," I answered sternly. "Really, you train?" Stephanie asked in awe. "Yes. Ever since I could walk and talk," I said, causing those around to gasp. "Don't fret. Now time is a-wasting, so let's get started," I said before, turning around to face the crowd. Matthews led me to a small platform which I mounted, and after clearing my throat softly and pulling on my blank mask, I started saying, "Good morning to you all. I know you must be wondering where your Alpha is. Well, he is not feeling well, so he will be a little late, but till he arrives I am in charge. If you have any questions you should ask now before training begins." I watched as about 5 hands were raised and picked the youngest to start. What is your name, and who are you to the Alpha?" she asked timidly. "My name is Chaos, and I am his mate." "Next question. Are you sure you can train us? How long have you been training?" A rather young but muscular man asked. "I am confident. I can, and I have been training since I could walk and talk. My mother was hard that way." "Next question. Are you sure you are the Alpha's mate and not his flavor of the month?" A familiar whiny voice asked, and I realized who she was. Letting out a spine-shivering laugh, I said, "You must be Cindy. You have been bitching about me since the first day I got here, and you don't know me from Adam. Now let everyone here listen, for I will say this only once. I may be a bitch, but I am nobody's bitch. I have Alpha blood running through my veins, and though I may be female, I take disrespect from no one. So here is what we're going to do. We are going to fight since you think I'm not fit to be your Alpha's mate and your Luna, and the only thing I can do is roll between sheets. I know respect isn't given but earned, and I couldn't agree more. So as soon as I get off this stage, we will fight it out of our system, and I will make sure to beat you into submission, since you refuse to see the fine line between me and you. But before I get off this stage, there are 2 males that also disrespected me yesterday. For your information, my ass and hips are not for you to get off on, and you don't have to wait for me to get naked, so you could get hard, because it would never happen. It was a blatant disrespect to me, as a woman and your Luna, and as I said before, I don't take disrespect lightly. So step out and move to the front with Cindy before my wolf comes to play, because then it will be bloody, and she leaves no one alive." I watched blankly though. I was smiling inside as Cindy and 2 other guys stepped out of the crowd that was growling threats at them. Though they tried to appear strong, I certainly didn't miss how they trembled or the fear that rolled off of them while the pack watched on with disbelief, curiosity, shock, and respect. I turned only to find Jeremiah, Matthews, and the rest of the warriors staring at me with pride and respect, and with a nod of acknowledgement. I turned and jumped down the makeshift platform. We are wolves, and this type of behavior was rather common, but that didn't mean it was appropriate. You turn a blind eye to this kind of behavior once, and the culprit will think they can repeat it any time and anywhere without consequence. And soon others will start to follow in their footsteps, and it automatically becomes a habit. I can't have that, so I am going to make an example out of them, so the rest will know that respect for all in any shape or form is required of them, as well as utmost discipline and control. As soon as I started walking towards the three culprits, the rest of the pack members walked backward to create space before making a circle so everyone could spread out, but still be able to see what was about to happen. I stopped in front of Cindy, and after sizing her up, I told her I would fight her last, so she should wait with Matthews, who didn't waste time in reaching forward to pull her away. I watched the two men standing in front of me before asking them, "What are your names?" "I am Luke, and he is Alex," the first one said. "Okay, which one of you will like to go first?" I asked in a monotone, after a moment of silence, and none of them moving. Alex spoke up. "Me. I would like to go first." "Good, Luke. Please wait with Beta Matthews while I finish up here." As soon as he left, I turned to Alex, who smiled smugly at me. I flashed him a bright smile before I started circling around him. I watched him as he let his ego and foolishness lead him into the fight instead of his brain. After dodging his attacks and edging him on to where I want him, I got into position, and that is when the real fight began. He put up a good fight, but his ego was thinking for him so much that he was sloppy and careless. Not to boast, but I beat him black and blue without letting him lay a hand on me. It went on for an hour before he barred his neck to me in submission, the moment he fell to the ground. I stepped back before reaching down and pulling him up to his feet, which turned out to be a chore, because I had really done a number on him. I studied him as some men came to take him off my hand, and I realized I may have hit him a little too hard. He had blood almost all over him, and with a sigh, I walked towards him, and after biting my wrist, I opened his mouth and allowed my blood to rush into it. It took a few moments before his wounds started healing, and I didn't miss the grateful glint in his eyes. I ruffled his hair and asked the men to get him to the infirmary before turning to Luke, who looked like he would shit his pants at any given time. I beckoned him forward and was not as surprised as he rushed to kneel in front of me before barring his neck in submission while he wept on. I knelt to his level, and after pulling him into my shoulders, I allowed him to weep his eyes out. It wasn't long before they turned to sniffles, and that is when I stood to my feet and brought him with me, lifting his head with my hand. I said softly to him, "You are scared enough, and you look like you've learned your lesson. But you cannot go unpunished, and though I may not fight you, you will make up for it one way or the other. I know there is always work around here somewhere that I can get you to do, but make no mistake. You disrespect an elderly one in this pack again, and I will find you and break your legs. Are we clear? Crystal Luna." "Am so sorry," he said shakily. "You better be. Now go get cleaned up, eat something and rest. I will check up on you later," I ordered as I pushed him towards the way out of the training grounds. I turned to find Cindy already walking towards me, with what she thought was a brave look on her face. "I will not beg you, Miss High and Mighty. Those boys may be weak, but I am not, and I will prove to everyone here why you are not fit to be Alpha's mate and this pack's Luna." Chuckling bitterly, I said, "I wouldn't have it any other way." And then the fight began. I was expecting more or say extraordinary, but she didn't deliver. I think she thought this was going to be a catfight. But the girl, was she wrong? She's got speed, which could be put to proper use with the right training, but here she was acting like a headless chicken, and it was getting on my nerves as well as Havoc's. I cut to the chase and went on full attack mode, beating the shit out of her till she submitted. Then I turned to return back to Matthews, only to be met with the proud glimmering eyes of my mate, his mum, Matthews himself, Jeremiah and his mate as well as his warriors. I smiled softly before walking into my mate's outstretched arms, and that's when I came down from my high on adrenaline rush, and heard the applause. I chuckled softly before pulling back to go on the makeshift platform, where I raised my hand to let them know the applause was enough, and when the place was quiet enough, I began to talk. Today has been eventful, and it's almost the end of our training session. But I believed we all learned an important lesson here today, and I hope no one makes those same mistakes again. I have seen a thing or two that I would like to rectify. That is after I have discussed it with my mate, my beta, and delta, as well as the warriors of this pack. So that is all for today. See you tomorrow. As soon as I joined my mate and his team, Alpha River said teasingly, "Am both frightened and aroused." Chuckling softly, I said, "You should be. I am nobody's bitch. You fuck with me, I screw you over. Simple." "Well, I want to fuck you and screw you so hard," Alpha River whispered huskily into my ears, to which I pretended not to have heard, causing him to burst into laughter. "I like you already," Jeremiah said. "Me too," the other warriors chorused, whilst Matthews nodded with a small smile. I turned to Alpha River's mum and pulled her into a hug, which surprised her and everyone around. I apologized for last night, but before she could say anything else, I was walking towards the house I woke up in with my mate, his mum, Matthews, Jeremiah, Stephanie, and some other man trailing behind them. I was hot and cold like that. I knew she would get sentimental and emotional, and I didn't do that with anyone or in public except my family. And now, my mate in the privacy of our room. And that is it. I headed upstairs to the bedroom I now shared with my mate, making quick work of stripping down. I entered the bathroom for a shower. The cold water, blasting down on me, soothed my tensed muscles. Though I may not have shown any emotion during training, I didn't enjoy what went down there. I hate disrespect, and no one messes around with me just because I am a woman. I didn't like confrontations, that is why I tried to avoid them as much as possible. I am their Luna, and they needed to respect that. I can be lenient when I want to. Clearing my mind, I focused on taking my mind and cleared my mind. My wolf was getting restless, and I knew I was stressing her out as well as myself. The change of environment together with the stress of meeting new people is getting to us, and I knew it will take just a small thing to trigger it. I stay in the shower till my skin starts to prune before turning the shower off. Grabbing a towel from a rack in the ensuite, I made quick work of toweling dry before wrapping it securely around me. I grab another one, and after drying my hair with it, I wrapped it tightly around my head before stepping out. Taking a quick glance around the room, I realized the clothes I discarded on the floor have been relocated to the dirty laundry basket. Lifting my nose up into the air and took a quick smell of the air and shivered when my mate's scent rushed into my nostrils and down my spine. With a shake of my head, I entered our walk-in closet and grabbed the first top I found with black ripped jeans and some undergarments. Dropping them in front of the dressing mirror, I applied my body cream, fixed my undergarments on before pulling the ripped jeans on. I took the top and opened it to see what I had picked. I smiled softly when I realized it was my favorite maroon basketball. Like top, the sleeves have been ripped off at the seams to put my tattoos on full display, and the sides parted, giving it a suave ghetto look. I shrugged it on before pulling my hair into a tight ponytail on top of my head, and then checking my look in the mirror. Feeling satisfied with my look, I walked to the shoe section and slipped my feet into my 6-inch maroon-black combat heel. Lacing it up, I walked to the bedroom and picked up my phone from the nightstand before walking out of the room whilst I replied back to the messages on my WhatsApp. It's a curse that we always get broken by the people that make us whole. A.J. Lawless. Still, chaos's Poe. Following my mate's scent, I allow it to lead me to wherever he was. I stopped when his scent became prominent in a particular place. Exchanging the last text with my mother. I slipped the phone back into my back pocket before lifting my head to take in my surroundings, and the sight I saw sent a knife through my already cold heart. I knew my mate, and this pack was too good to be true. My mate sat at the head of what looked like the packed dining table with a woman in his lap chatting animatedly. Calling on to my birth-given ability, I cloaked my scent and self before venturing into the room to listen to their conversation. You know you would have to get up before my mate returns, right? My mate asked the lady on his lap rather seriously. But we used to do this all the time, and you didn't complain, honey. The girl said, with a frown on her face. Yeah, I know, and I still don't have a problem with it, but my mate is here, and I don't want her to see this. Fine, I understand, but you won't stop sleeping with me, right? We've come so far to stop now, baby. Chuckling softly, my mate said. Yeah, I know. I never said we were stopping, did I? Now give me a kiss. They were locked in a rather passionate kiss when Felicia entered the room. I was expecting her to rebuke her son or something, but boy was I wrong. With a small smile on her face, she said, You two know how to put a smile on my face. When will this fling end, huh? Trisha, you know his mate is up there, right? I know, Mama River, but for one, we aren't ending this anytime soon. Jay Bear said so, and two, what she doesn't know won't hurt her, Trisha said with a smug smirk on her face. Having heard enough, I walked back to the entrance I was previously coming from and uncloaked myself, letting my scent and my alpha aura leak out heavily. I took in deep breaths, whilst trying to get Havoc and our other side under control. I guess this mating was like a joke to them. No wonder he didn't mark me and react, like alphas who found their mates normally would. He had someone else, that is why he was so laid back, and he tolerated me around because of the mate bond, and he couldn't outrightly disobey the moon goddess. I feel like every affection I have been shown was false. I bared my heart out to him for crying out loud. I couldn't take it anymore. I felt like my heart is being cut into pieces over and over again. It was stupid to have kept clinging to the hope of having a mate love me. Like my father did my mum. I may be acting tough, but that doesn't change the fact that I also wanted a mate. Someone to love me for me. Someone who makes me happy just as much as I will thrive to make him. I was prepared to take on anything from an arrogant and demanding mate to an annoying egotistic mate, because he was my mate after all. But not this. Blatant disrespect and cheating right under my nose. A mockery of my status as Luna. I could literally see white fury boiling up inside of me and my wolf, but we both knew we couldn't let loose because any careless decision could lead to innocent people getting hurt, and I didn't want that. Besides, my mate was my business, and I will deal with it my way. Taking a couple of deep breaths, I tried to get my rage under control. My wolf had shut off our bond, and I knew she was also immensely hurt. I was still getting myself under control when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Matthew staring at me warily. Are you all right, Luna? He asks softly. Did you know too? I respond in a stony voice. Know what? Matthew said with a confused look on his face. Peek into the room and tell me. I watch as Matthews sneaked a glance into the room and quickly redrew back with his mouth and eyes wide open. But one proper glance at the guilty look on his face told me he also knew. I guess that is why he tried to mess with me when I first got here. Shaking my head, I blew air out of my mouth and said to him, Don't tell them I saw. I will deal with it my own way. Swear to me. With a shaky breath, he said softly, I swear. Good. Now take the lead. I will follow soon. Let them know I will be down in a minute. I watch as Matthews calmed himself before walking into the dining hall. I listened as he exchanged pleasantries before telling them that I was on my way down. It was amusing to hear them fret and possibly try to put on a convincing facade for me. With a quick prayer to the moon goddess and fate for strength, I squared my shoulders and walked into the room with my head held up high and my blank mask fixed tightly in place. These people messed with the wrong bitch. I will show them why I am called Chaos. The sight that met me nearly made me laugh, but I held it back. If they thought I was stupid, then they had another thing coming. Once again, I have been mocked and underestimated by the person I least expected. No wonder trust is rare these days. They give you a present with their right hand and poison you with the left one. My mate was going through some files. His mother was busily setting the table. Matthews looked like he was playing a game on his phone, and the lady in question, Trisha, was standing in the doorway to the kitchen with her back facing them. Well, I guess she isn't that bold after all. I was going to sit down, but I backtracked and walked directly past Trisha and into the kitchen where I found some of the older women in the pack, still making breakfast. I fetched a plate and fork before approaching them with a small smile on my face. Greeting them softly, I asked for my breakfast, which they were more than delighted to give me. They made quick work of piling up my plate with hash browns, bacon, an omelet, and pancakes with a glass of orange juice. I settled on a stool beside the kitchen island and went on ahead to dig into my food. I noticed the frown on Felicia's face when she realized I was eating alone in the kitchen. But I chose to ignore her. I felt her move in my direction, and before long, she was standing on the other end of the island with a smile on her face. It made me sick. I nodded at her, but didn't return her smile. Her smile dropped when she realized this. Clearing her throat forcibly, she inquired, "Honey, why are you eating here alone? I'm going somewhere. Please call Matthews for me when you go back to the hall." "Thanks," I replied dismissively in a cold tone. I went back to eating without paying her any attention and let out a sigh of relief when I felt her leave. Matthews came into the question with a confused frown on his face. "Luna, you asked for me," he said with a respectful bow. "Yes, I did. Take a seat and get some food to eat. We leave right afterward. I want you to take me somewhere. Really? Oh." Kay Matthews rushed out in surprise before doing as I instructed. We finished off our breakfast in record time and stood up to head out. But before we could exit the kitchen, Alpha River walked in with a scowl on his face. "Where are you two going?" he asked in a menacing tone. Before Matthews could answer, I shrugged my shoulders nonchalantly and said, "I am going out to town and I want Matthews to take me. But when I come back, we are going to have a talk. There is something important that I would like to discuss with you. Why didn't you ask me to take you? You were quite busy when I walked in and I didn't want to disturb you. After all, pack duties and members are our top priorities, right?" I smiled inwardly when he and his mother tensed up. Am glad they caught the double meaning of my statement. They are so going to pay. Alpha River was silent, so his mum answered in a small voice. "Yes, they are." "Good. I'm running late, so we will talk when I come back." "Let's go, Matthews," I said coldly, as I made my way outside with Matthews trailing behind me. We drove around town for an hour or two, stopping at particular shops to purchase and place orders for toiletries, bedspreads, duvets, cooking utensils, television sets, and any other thing I will need to furnish a home. Matthews had this curious look all the time, probably wondering why I was purchasing all this stuff and what crazy stunt I wanted to pull, but I ignored him. He will find out in due time. After I was satisfied with my purchase, I asked him to drive me to my mother's pack. I stifled a laugh as his eyes widened like saucers and saw how fidgety he suddenly became. I waited for a few minutes before deciding to put him out of his misery, clearing my throat softly. I said to him, "Calm your tits, will you? I am not returning to my mother's pack. I'm not that kind of woman, and besides, I can't run from my responsibilities as Luna just because your stupid alpha has no morals. I'm going to do what I do best. Confront him, teach him a lesson, and move on with my life." "But what are you planning on doing?" Matthews asked worriedly. "Oh, nothing drastic. Just wait and find out, okay?" "Okay," he replied dejectedly. I stared out my side of the window for the rest of the ride, enjoying the wind on my face and trying to make a conversation with my wolf, which proved futile. I know she's hurt, just like I am, and her silence is her way of dealing with it. She needs time when processing her emotions, while I just face them head-on before pushing them to the back of my mind. If need be, I knew my wolf well, and she was in perfect sync with me because, after my first shift, I took time to know her and let her grow and explore at her own pace. I ushered her into my life to the ladder, just like she did with me, and that makes us both a formidable foe. I let her be after I realized she just wanted to be alone and focused on getting home. I didn't have to wait long because Matthews pulled up onto my mother's compound before I could even nag him about how long till we get there. As usual, my mother and brothers stood in front of our home waiting for our arrival. The patrol teams at the border always alerted them when someone crossed the border, even if the person has already called ahead. With a deep breath, I opened the door and stepped out. Matthews did the same, and with a curt nod in my mother and brother's direction, he turned and vanished from our line of vision before my mother could invite him in. Scaredy wolf, but I don't blame him. My mother has that effect on people. I walked towards my mother and threw myself into her open arms. My mother knew me. She knew the only reason I would have come back so soon, as if something was wrong. My brothers watched me with knowing eyes before turning to take the lead whiles I followed with my mother. We settled in my mother's office because it was soundproof, and I didn't need someone gossiping about me and my mate. We all sat in silence waiting for me to state the problem. After 5 solid minutes, I broke the silence by clearing my throat. "My mate has a lover," I said coldly. After a moment of silence, my mother said harshly, "What the fuck do you mean by he has a lover? You heard me, Mum." I walked in on them having a conversation about not quitting their relationship, and what baffles me is that his mum knows about it. In fact, I think every soul in the higher rank knows about it. I'm sure they made fun of me behind my back. I just knew he was too good to be true. I spat out angrily. "And what are you going to do about this lover of his?" Lucas spat with disgust. "Nothing," I said softly. "What do you mean by nothing?" my mother asked angrily. "I'm not going to fight for something that isn't even mine, Mom. He may be my mate by the moon goddess and fate's order, but he wants another. Should I fight and force my way into his heart, the possibility of him faking his affection for me is 99.9%, and I don't want that. I won't force him to see my worth, but neither am I going to neglect my duties as their Luna. I owe it to the pack and not him, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to call him out on his stupidity. I'm going to teach him the lesson of his life," Chaos said quietly with a pain-laced voice. "That's more like it, little sis." "So, what's the plan?" Lucian said, cheekily trying to bring light to the tensed, gloomy atmosphere in the room. "Seden. Shu Dawe." Lucas chuckled at his brother's childish antics before turning to look at their mother, who had a hard look on her face, with rage rolling off of her in waves. They had all been there when their mother had threatened the said alpha mate, and he had had the balls to swear to them never to hurt Chaos. But here they were, their little sister back home with her heart broken into pieces. She may act strong and nonchalant, but they knew her enough to know her already cold heart was now as cold as an iceberg on Antarctica. She was cold and emotionally detached from the outside world at a very young age until she shifted. And that was when she started recognizing and getting a hang of some of the emotions a human body was supposed to be accustomed to. Little by little, with the help of her wolf, she progressed, and now that her mate had fucked up, they feared secretly for what might happen to her or what might become of her. Lucas was brought out of his thoughts by Chaos' hard tone as she gave an answer to Lucian's question. That was why I came here, Luce. I'm still thinking about it, but in the meantime, I wanted to ask Mum to call Dad's friend Hephaestus, the god of dwellings, furnishing, weapons, and fire. There are some things I have in mind that I wanted to discuss with him. And then Chaos launched into details of the things she plans to carry out. Oh, that's harsh, sis, Luce teased when she was done. Well, that's the least of his problems because I'm going to tear into my mate's conscience and torment the living daylights out of him. Make him his own personal hell to enjoy till he knows he messed with the wrong bitch. Fuck. I almost forgot that you were the craziest psychopath amongst the three of us, Lucas teased. Before Chaos could retort back, their mother questioned in a grave tone, what about the mating ceremony? The first mating and the full moon mating. Well, I guess fate is on my side, or maybe Dad is knocking some sense into him because for one, I am going to be having my mating ceremony tomorrow, and the full moon is the day after tomorrow, and by the day after tomorrow Hephaestus will have been done with all the things I want, and then the real fun will begin. What about your children? You know what the full moon does to the females in our family. You are likely to conceive on that very day, honey. Their mum questioned again. I'm well aware of that, Mum, but that changes nothing. That child will have my flesh and blood, as well as my mate's, and I will not deny him or her the right to know his or her father. In the same way, I am not denying my new responsibility as Luna. It seems you have everything figured out, and I couldn't be more proud. So, I'm going to sit back and try not to intervene, because if I do I might kill someone. I will let you do your thing, but if you need help, don't hesitate to ask me and your brothers, okay? Okay, Mum Chaos replied with a small smile on his face. They caught up on a few things in their lives, and then it was time to go. With a brief hug exchanged around, Chaos walked out with her two brothers, while her mother stayed behind to get a hold of Hephaestus. The three of them walked in silence till they got out to the compound where Matthews stood beside his car with a thrashing woman surged firmly to his chest. With hurried walks, Chaos approached them and asked what was going on. This buffoon wants to take me against my will, the woman complained. Matthews, what is going on? Let her go, Chaos commanded. I'm sorry, Luna, but she's my mate, and I can't let her run away from me, Matthews said in an agitated voice. Oh, well, I can assure you she won't go anywhere, so please loosen your grip on her and let me talk to her, Chaos said softly. With great reluctance, Matthews loosened the grip on his mate and turned her round to face Chaos, only to hear her let out a surprised gasp. Kiara, when did you get back? Chaos asked the woman standing in front of Matthews, who was just as equally surprised as Chaos. When did I get back? Fuck you, Kay. You see me after 3 good years and you ask me when I came back. Come give your favorite bitch a hug, Kiara scolded before stepping forward to pull Chaos into a well-awaited hug. They hugged it out for a few minutes before breaking apart. Chaos chuckled cheekily when she saw Matthews following Kiara's movement with his eyes. She wasn't sure if he even blinked. Turning to face Kiara, she said smugly, So? You finally found your mate, and you finally became Luna? Kiara retorted back with a smug smile of her own. Chaos rolled her eyes at the childish behavior before asking seriously, So are you going to go with us? Or you are going to reject him? Hell no, Kay. He may be an annoying buffoon, but I only got one mate in this life, and I'm not going to waste that chance. You know, I hate having regrets. I will rather give it a shot, so that when it doesn't work... I know I tried, Kiara replied seriously. You know I am going to do everything to make this work, right? There's no way in hell I'm letting you walk away. Matthews cut in with a deep husky tone that indicated that his wolf was out. A shudder rushed through Kiara's spine, causing her to flush and Matthews to chuckle heartily when he realized. Chaos stood and observed in silence, the scene playing out in front of her. She felt like a knife has been driven into her heart, knowing her mate wanted another even after he had found her. She knew she would never know what it felt like to be held and loved by one's mate. She clenched her teeth when she heard Havoc howling in pain. Even though they had both been cheated on, Havoc took the blow the hardest. She may be one of the most dangerous wolves out there, but she always wore her heart on her sleeves in regards to her mate. She had dreamt about finding their mate and living happily ever after. Even when she knew life wasn't fair that way, she had allowed herself to have hope. Something Chaos wished she could go back and stop the moment Havoc had started doing that. She felt guilty for the pain her wolf was going through and wished there was something she could do to help her. She didn't care about her own pain because she had buried as much as she could, but Havoc couldn't, and that had rage boiling through her. She was brought out of her thoughts by Kiara, shaking her with a worried look on her face. "What?" Chaos asked in confusion. "You were lost in thought with that look on your face, Kay." "What happened?" Kiara asked knowingly. "I will explain when we are away from here. Go get your bags so we can leave. I promise I will explain as soon as we hit the road."
The car ride back was a rather tense one because Matthews was afraid of what Kiara might think of him when Chaos tells her what was wrong. Kiara was worried that someone had done something to Chaos and was scared because should Chaos decide to pay him or her back, all hell would break loose. Chaos was lost in her thoughts, thinking of all the ways she could make Alpha River suffer without killing him. This continued till Kiara couldn't take it anymore. Turning in her seat at the front, she asked softly, "What is wrong, Kay?" "My mate has a lover," Chaos replied bluntly, causing Kiara to gasp and Matthews to flinch. "What? How?" Kiara asked confused. "Well, I walked in on them the second day I arrived, discussing whether they were going to quit their ongoing relationship or not. They decided not to quit, and my mate's lover, Trisha, said what I didn't know won't hurt me. But too bad I know, and now I'm going to hurt them." She said that? Matthews asked with surprise, as he was hearing the inside truth of how Chaos found out for the first time. "So you knew?" Kiara stated, whilst looking in Matthews's direction. "Well, they all knew. I mean, all the high-ranked members of his pack. And the worst is his mother. Would you believe she welcomed me on the day of my arrival with a smile on her face? The same smile she flashed my mate's lover when she found them in the dining area, as if what they were doing wasn't wrong." Chaos cut in before Matthews could answer. "That's downright disgusting. I can't believe your mate could do that to you. Ugh, so what are you going to do?" "Oh, I have a whole lot planned for them, Kiara, but I'm afraid I can't tell you now. But one thing is clear, though. I'm going to ruin my mate and pay him back so hard that he will know not to mess with me, even if he dies and comes back again." "Okay, I will wait. But then I saw some stuff in the booth, and Matthew said they belong to you. What are you going to do with all that stuff?" "Well, they are for my new home. That much I could tell you. Uncle Hephaestus is coming soon." "Really? It's been a while since I last saw him." "Yes, me too. You will meet him, though, when he comes over to the pack." Is your uncle the same Hephaestus I'm thinking? The god of dwellings, furnishing, and weapons?" Matthews cut in. "He's the one, Matt. If he's coming, then I know Chaos is about to do something drastic." Kiara replied in an excited tone. Luna, you promised not to do anything drastic, Matthew said. Well, you don't get to decide for me. Put yourself in my shoes, and put Kiara in your alpha's place with a lover, and tell me you would sit calm and do nothing? It is even against our nature as wolves to sit calmly when we are being made a fool of, and you know it. Chaos chided Matthews. Matthews fell silent afterward, knowing Chaos had spoken the truth. The rest of the car ride was just as silent till they arrived at the Silver River Pack border. Kiara squealed in excitement as she took in the beauty of her new home as they ventured further into the pack. She awed and pointed at every new thing she saw till Matthews reached his parking spot and killed the engine. They exited Matthew's car, but before he could get to the car booth, Chaos told him to keep the stuff there till she was ready. With a curt nod in her direction, he opened the back door and pulled out Kiara's belongings. He was so focused on getting his mate's belongings out of his car that he didn't recognize the moment she walked off with Chaos towards the main house.
After he had packed everything into his room, he went to find them. He caught up with them as they were heading towards the pack's conference room. He wondered what they were going to do there and tried to get a reading on their facial expressions, only to come face to face with the meanest and coldest blank masks a person or wolf could ever wear on their face. He now understood how these two women had stayed friends for a long time. It was true, after all, that birds of the same feather flock together. He quietly followed them into the conference room, only to be met with his co-high-ranked members and their alpha. He grabbed Kiara's hand to his seat, and after pulling out a seat for her, he settled in another one beside her. They all watched in silence as Chaos ignored her mate and settled herself at the other end of the long table in the conference room. A tense silence filled the room as Alpha River and Chaos stared at each other heatedly. The others thought it was just two mates lost in each other's eyes, but Matthews and Kiara knew better. It was a standoff between an edgy man who knew he was doing something shady in the dark and was wondering if he had been caught or not, and a woman with her, the she-wolf, who was hurt and scorned, but was also hell-bent on not making things easy for her mate. This went on for a couple of minutes before Chaos cleared her throat and the standoff was temporarily broken. She took a couple of deep breaths before opening her mouth to speak. "I'm glad we are all here, because I was about to call you all. First and foremost, I would like my mating ceremony to be held tomorrow. That is, if my mate will allow it," Chaos said as she flashed Alpha River a small smile that had him flustered for a moment because he wasn't expecting this. Sure, I have no problem with that," Alpha River answered with a small smile of his own as the men in the room hollered with excitement. "Good. Then moving on to pack matters, I want to shed light on today's training. I know you are trying to make them all warriors, or at least capable of holding their own, but you have to realize that not everyone is good at hand-to-hand combat. Some don't want physical contact during battle, and others don't want the stress and pain that comes with hand-to-hand combat." "Yes, you are right, but what other choice do we have?" Jeremiah asked curiously. "Well, that's where I come in. I have extensive training in archery, swordsmanship, and dagger throwing. We can put all these options out there and have everyone choose which one they would like to try and better themselves in. That way, everyone will have a part to play in times of battle and even when not in battle," Chaos explained. "Well, if you put it that way, then I see things working. Training will be easy," Matthew said. "As much as it sounds easy, it isn't. My mother sure as hell didn't make it easy for me, and I'm not going to make it any easier because I will be training them myself." "I bet you won't, you sadistic bitch," Kiara sassed, causing all eyes to widen at the blatant disrespect towards their Luna. But they were even more surprised when the said Luna chuckled with a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips as she retorted back. "Of course, I wouldn't be Chaos without being the sadistic bitch that I am. But don't you sit there and act as if you are any better. I may be the worst of worst, but you are just one step behind me, Kiara." "You're right, my friend. We wouldn't be the good friends we are if it wasn't for that," Kiara replied softly.
The people in the room watched the interaction with uneasiness and fascination because of the way they threw words at each other and with confidence, which the new lady in the room spoke her mind to their Luna and how their Luna was at ease with her. Matthews felt cold shivers rush down his spine when Chaos pointed out the fact that his mate was just as sadistic as she was, and Alpha River was downright uncomfortable with the words that had been thrown around. But he also wanted to know who exactly the new woman was and what her business was in their conference room. If I may ask, who exactly is this lady to you, Chaos? Where did she come from? Alpha River asked staidly. Chaos then turned to look at Kiara, and after giving her a not-so-subtle nod, Kiara spoke up. "Why don't you ask me yourself, Mr. Alpha?" "Watch the way you speak to me, woman," Alpha River growled out. "Or what? Before we get down to the necessary introductions, I want to make it clear that though you may be an alpha, you are certainly not mine. Chaos has been and will always be my alpha, and that's not going to change. And before you go all alpha on me, I've got something sweet for you. The truth always comes out, no matter how deep it's buried. You may be comfortable in the shadows because you think it's a temporal home for your secret, but know that that same shadow is a permanent dwelling place for another." Alpha River turned swiftly to glance around the room, and he knew in his heart of the heart that his time was nearing. He watched as his trusted men shifted uneasily in their seats, while some looked outrightly nervous. He set his eyes on Chaos afterward, only to find her famous blank mask back on her face. His mind was running faster than it usually did, and he couldn't help but feel as if this new lady knew exactly what she was saying. But then he couldn't be so sure, because like Chaos, she had the same blank mask on her face, with her eyes dead cold. Taking a deep breath, he asked as calmly as he could, "Who are you?" "Well, now that you ask, my name is Kiara Korn, cousin to Chaos. That's as much as you deserve to know. And oh, I'm also the mate of your beta," Kiara answered coldly, whilst everybody's head snapped towards the said beta, who was smiling rather cockily at them. He rolled his eyes when they started hollering at me. His friends were idiots, and he knew they could have done worse, just like he did to Jeremiah when he found his mate, Stephanie. He had clung to Jeremiah and acted like a broken-hearted lover to the extent that Stephanie had wanted to leave. It had put Jeremiah in a tight spot, as he tried to make Stephanie believe that Matthews was joking, but Matthews wasn't making it easier too. It took a while, but they made it, and now they all laughed whenever that particular incident was brought up. Chaos, seeing that she was getting more pissed off in the presence of her mate, excused herself and walked out. She didn't make it far before she heard her mate calling after her. "Chaos, are you all right?" Alpha River asked softly. "No, I'm not. I have a headache, and I would like to lie down for a while." Chaos lied smoothly. "Headache? Are you sure that's all?" "Yeah, I'm sure. And besides, tomorrow is going to be a long day, so I need to rest." "About tomorrow, are you sure you really want to have the ceremony?" "Yes, I'm sure." "You do know the full moon is the day after tomorrow, right?" "Yes, I know. I just want to do everything and get it over it. It's like it's hanging in the air, and I don't feel comfortable that way." "Okay, go ahead and take a nap. I will wake you up before dinner." "Okay, thanks." With a kiss on Chaos's forehead, Alpha River stood still and watched his mates retreating back. He couldn't help but feel as if there was something wrong with his mate, and with the message that Kiara had delivered to him, he felt as if something was about to go down. That girl had been cold and downright disrespectful to him on their first physical interaction, and his only guess was that she knew something. Her last name rung a familiar bell in his ears, but he couldn't quite place it. He had other important matters to deal with, like his upcoming mating ceremony. With a small smile on his face, he went to find his mother.
I walked into our bedroom only to find my mate's clothes scattered around the room. With a chuckle, I bent down and picked them up. I deposited them into the laundry basket, and that was when I heard the shower going on in the bathroom. Grabbing my clothes, boxers, and shoes, I walked out of the room and into the one adjacent to ours to take a quick shower. I was done showering and dressed in a couple of minutes. I walked out to go talk to my mate only to be met with a smiling Trisha. She's the only woman I have bedded and still wanted around. I cared deeply for her, and I know I was developing feelings for her. I had given myself a year that if I still didn't find my mate, I would choose her. But then luck was not on our side because I went for an alliance meeting, only to return with a mate I never dreamt of. I felt the power of the mate bond as soon as we made human contact. But I guess I would have to find a solution to this problem. Flashing Trisha a smile in return, I pulled her into my arms, and after dropping a quick kiss on her forehead, I grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the pack's dining hall. I took a seat at the head and allowed her to settle on my lap. "We need to talk," I said softly. "I know. I heard you found your mate," she replied sadly. "Yes, Trish, I did. She's the daughter of Alpha Chaos of the Midnight Chaos Pack. Oh, I heard she was a spoilt brat. But they are all false, honey. She's the exact opposite, and just like her mother. Cold, unforgiving, and fierce." "Oh, really?" "Yes, and I would recommend you stay out of her way. We may mean so much to each other. But don't forget, she's my mate, and she will be Luna." "I know I don't want her position. I just want you, and you have me." Trisha smiled brightly before making herself on my lap. I knew she had the intention of not getting up anytime soon. "You know you would have to get up before my mate returns, right?" I asked Trisha seriously. "But we used to do this all the time, and you didn't complain, honey," she said with a frown on her face. "Yeah, I know, and I still don't have a problem with it, but my mate is here and I don't want her to see this." "Fine, I understand. But you won't stop sleeping with me, right? We've come so far to stop now, baby." Chuckling softly at her antics, I said, "Yeah, I know. I never said we were stopping, did I? Now give me a kiss." We were locked in a rather passionate kiss when my mother entered the room. I was not bothered because she already knew about us and loved Trisha like her very own daughter. With a small smile on my mother's face, she said, "You two know how to put a smile on my face. When will this fling end, huh? Trisha, you know his mate is up there, right?" "I know, Mama River. But for one, we aren't ending this anytime soon." Jay Bear said so in two. "What she doesn't know won't hurt her," Trisha said with a smug smirk on her face. I was trying to stifle my laughter when I felt a foreign presence behind me. It felt familiar, but I couldn't pinpoint where I have felt it before. I tried to smell the presence out, but before I could find anything concrete, it was gone. I sat there trying to make out what had just happened, only to be interrupted by a spooked Matthews entering the hall. He kept turning around to watch his back before settling in his seat. After exchanging pleasantries with all of us, I went straight ahead to ask him what was wrong. "Luna is on her way down," he said shackily. "Damn it!" I cussed before lifting Trisha off of me and rushing into the living room to grab some documents I left there last night. I walked back to the hall with the documents only to find Trisha standing in the kitchen doorway and my mother making herself busy in the kitchen. I looked at Matthews only to find him also busy with his phone. Taking a deep breath, I settled back down in my seat and spread the documents in front of me. It was a couple of minutes later before I smelt my mate. I focused on my documents as she made her way into the dining hall. I felt her head towards me before backtracking and making her way into the kitchen. I sneaked a glance in her direction and saw the moment that Trisha tensed before relaxing when she realized my mate wasn't after her. I strained my ears and frowned when I heard my mate asking for her food and the reply she gave my mother when she asked her why she was eating alone in the kitchen. My frown deepened when she asked for Matthew, and I guess Matthews was just as confused as I was, too, with the surprised look on his face when my mother came to fetch him. I sat back in my seat and tried to find a reason as to why my mate was so cold all of a sudden. I knew it wasn't about Trisha and me because, from the little I have seen from her, I knew she would have raised hell as soon as she had found out. I sat there thinking before getting up. I walked into the kitchen and asked her where she was going with Matthews and why she didn't ask me to take her out when she wanted to go out. Her reply was cold and blunt as she told me. She was going into town and didn't ask me because she saw I was busy when she entered the dining hall and didn't want to disturb me. She went on to add that our pack members and pack duties were our top priority, and the double meaning of that simple sentence had me tensing up. My mother and Trisha must have heard it too because they also tensed up too. I was in so much shock that I couldn't answer her question, but thankfully my mother answered for me. Before I could recover fully from my temporal shock, my mate was already out of the kitchen and out of the door with Matthews trailing after me. The three of us stood there in tense silence and only snapped out of our stupor when we heard Matthews's car peeling out of the pack compound. I let out a deep breath before walking back into the dining hall and slumping into my seat. "Do you think she knows?" my mother asked worriedly. "I think she does," Trisha answered quietly. "She doesn't know." I tried to reassure them and myself. "Are you sure?" Trisha asked shackily. "Yes. If she had known you would have been hurt or dead right now," I said bluntly. "Yeesh. Such comforting words, Trisha," replied sarcastically. "Well, it's the truth, Trisha. We have to be careful next time." This was close. Way too close for comfort. "I know, J-Bear, and you were right. She didn't look like the kind of person you messed with. The tattoos on her arms were cool, but the dead look in her eyes accompanied by her stone-cold tone will give me nightmares for a while. I know Trish. She's different like that. And also, beautiful. Don't go insecure on me now, Trisha. She's here and you are you. Don't go comparing yourself to her now. It wouldn't end well. Okay, I'm going to the clinic to help out. I will see you later." "Sure, take care." Trisha left as if something or say someone was after. She and I knew meeting Chaos had ruffled her feathers, or say her fur. I know I told them that Chaos didn't know, but the more I think about it, the more uncertain I become about that fact. But I guess I would have to wait and find out. I spent the rest of the day in my office, working till it was time for the daily meeting with my high-ranked members, and Matthews, and my mate was still not back. I entered the conference room and smiled when I found them chatting and making fun of each other. They can be childish at times, but that's just who they were. I settled in my seat, and as soon as I had made myself comfortable, my Gamma Richard Davidson asked the whereabouts of Matthews. Drawing the attention of the others in the room, "He's taken my mate to town," I replied. "Your mate?" he asked with surprise. "Yep, Richie. I found her on the day you left for the Blue Moon Pack. How come nobody told me?" he shrieked in outrage. For a man, he sure knew how to be dramatic. Jeremiah rolled his eyes before cutting in. "You just arrived, idiot, and before we could welcome you, you were going on and on about all the women you fucked at the Blue Moon Pack." The rest of the men in the room laughed, whilst Richie tried so hard not to flush with embarrassment. They were going at it when the door to the conference room opened, and my mate walked in with all her cold glory. But the person behind her was what caught my attention. A young, beautiful woman with a cold mask matching Chaos on her face. I watched silently as they all entered with Matthews at the end. My mate walked to the other end of the table, whilst Matthews grabbed the hand of the lady they came with. And after pulling a seat for her to sit down, he pulled another beside her and settled down. I turned back to face my mate only to find her already staring intensely at me. I held her gaze and tried to get a reading on her, but as usual, I came up empty because she had her lovely blank mask on her face. As I watched her, I couldn't help but wonder if she knew about Trisha. I don't know why, but I couldn't help but feel that she knew. Caden has been unusually quiet since morning, and I know it's because of the guilt he feels from caring about Trisha just like I do. He had despised her at first, but just like me he had grown to like her. And now our mate was with us and he couldn't help but feel guilty. Our staring match was interrupted by my mate clearing her throat. She looked like she wanted to say something, and after taking a deep breath, she opened her mouth to speak. The words that left her mouth next had me dropping my jaw in shock. She wanted our mating ceremony to be tomorrow, that is if I would allow it. Hell, yeah, I would. I chuckled when my immature friends started hollering with excitement. I looked at her face to check if she was just pulling my legs, only to get a small smile in return. That had my pants tightening. After I had to give my approval, she went on to pack business, and I couldn't be more proud that she already saw my pack as her own. I listened tentatively, with the rest as she proposed a different training technique for the wolves that didn't favor hand-to-hand combat and gruesome bloodshedding, but still wanted to be helpful in times of war, and even when they needed to defend themselves. I was a tad bit surprised when she said her mother had trained her in swordsmanship, archery, and dagger throwing. My mate was more dangerous than I thought her to be, but I am glad she has decided to share her knowledge for the betterment of our pack. She will make a great Luna. And I know my men agree to that from the respect and pride that shone from their eyes. My mate thoroughly answered all the questions she was asked without interruptions, till she got to the part where she let us know that she was going to train them herself, and isn't going to go easy on them, because her mother didn't. The beautiful young lady that she had entered the room with cut her off and called her a sadistic bitch. I was about to growl in warning at her blatant disrespect, when my mate looked in her direction and chuckled before telling the lady she won't be chaos without being the sadistic bitch that lady said she was, and then went on further to playfully scold her for trying to act like a saint when she was just a step behind her. My men and I watched in fascination and worry at the familiar friendliness between these two ladies and how they were at ease throwing jibes at each other, even in our presence. When I had had enough, I asked my mate who the lady was, and I guess that was my mistake, because my mate looked at the lady in question, and after giving her a curt nod, the lady herself spoke. "Why don't you ask me yourself, Mr. Alpha?" she said rudely. "Watch the way you speak to me, woman." I growled out. "Or what?" Before we get down to the necessary introductions, I want to make it clear that, though you may be an alpha, you are certainly not mine. Chaos has been and will always be my alpha, and that's not going to change. And before you go all alpha on me, I've got something sweet for you. The truth always comes out, no matter how deep it is buried. You may be comfortable in the shadows because you think it's a temporal home for your secret, but know that that same shadow is a permanent dwelling place for another," she said cryptically, with mockery laced in her words. I turned swiftly to glance around the room, and I knew in my heart of the heart that disaster was nearing. I watched as his trusted men shifted uneasily in their seats, while some looked outrightly nervous. It seems they had also caught on to the depth of what the mysterious woman had said. I set my eyes on my mate afterward, only to find her famous blank mask back on her face. My mind was running faster than it usually did, and I couldn't help but feel as if this new lady knew exactly what she was saying. But then, I couldn't be so sure, because like my mate, she also had the same blank mask on her face, with her eyes dead cold. Taking a deep breath, I asked as calmly as I could, "Who are you?" "Well, now that you ask, my name is Kiara Horn. Cousin to Chaos, that's as much as you deserve to know. And oh, I'm also the mate of your beta," she answered coldly. Like a practiced act, we all turned to look at my beta in question only to find him smiling cockily. We now owed him. We had bet that he wouldn't find his mate any time soon when he had once told us that he felt her near. We had all made fun of him for having false hopes and dreams just because I had found my mate. He had just smiled smugly and asked us to bet. We each owed him $100 each. We had to bet big because we were so sure of ourselves. But then here we are now. I looked at his mate and I felt uneasy. I can't get rid of her now because as my beta's mate and my mate's cousin, how lucky for her. I was still watching Kiara as she interacted with the other men in the room in a much lighter tone and mood than she had done with me, and it has been established that she had a personal vendetta with me, or it could be that she just didn't like me. I was brought out of my thoughts when I heard the door to the room opening and then closing. I threw a quick glance around only to realize it was my mate. Quickly getting out of my seat, I rushed out after her. I caught up with her easy, and when I saw the painful look on her face, I couldn't help but ask her what was wrong. "It's nothing. Just a headache," was the answer she gave me. I pressed on till I was sure it was just a headache, but then it seems to be just one little fact. The enormity of our mating ceremony was also weighing on her nerves. I questioned that too to make sure that was really what she wants. With the full moon happening afterward, and I was internally ecstatic that she still wanted it. With a kiss on her forehead, I sent her on her way whilst I pondered on the events of the last couple of minutes. To be honest, Kiara had spooked me and something in my gut told me it had to be deliberate. She had known what she was talking about, but I didn't dwell on it too much when I remembered my mating ceremony was tomorrow. With a smile on my face, I went to find my mum and dad to give them the good news. Sawade. C.D. Wade. I find my mum and dad, Gregory sitting in the hall watching television in each other's arms, and the sight had me burning with yearning. I wanted what they had, and now that I had found my mate, I would get it. Besides, I get double because Trisha is also there. I walk up to them and after ruffling my father's hair just to spite him, I dropped a kiss on my mother's forehead before seating myself on the couch. Facing them, my mother might have picked up on my good mood because she asked softly, "What are you in a good mood about?" "Well, Chaos just asked if we could have our mating ceremony tomorrow." And I said yes, and she spoke about an additional training method for the wolves who didn't like a hand-to-hand combat, physical contact, or ghastly bloodshedding. I replied with my chest puffed out with pride. "Oh, that's great. I will go and start preparations for tomorrow." My mother squealed with excitement before rushing outside. I watched her exit the house with a smile on my face, only to turn and find my father staring off into space with a frown on his face. "What is wrong, father?" I asked with worry. "What about Trisha's son? I must say your mate is Luna material with great potential, and I won't sit back and watch you ruin her." My father said sternly, "Father, I care about Trisha, and I'm not going to throw her away just because I found my mate. It will take time, and somewhere in the near future, we will go our separate ways, and besides, what my mate does know won't hurt her. You disappoint me sometimes. You and your mother both, because she keeps encouraging you to act foolishly. I advise you to break things off with Trisha before you ruin your life with your mate before it even begins. What could possibly go the wrong, Dad? The mating ceremony is tomorrow and I get to mark and mate with her. The full moon mating follows the day afterward, and then the deal will be sealed. She will be mine. You may be alpha now, but I think you are letting your fling with Trisha get into your head. There are so many things that could go wrong after your mating, and the things that happen afterward always leave a lasting impression. But nothing. Stop taking you to mate for a fool and give her the respect she deserves. End that fling with Trisha before tomorrow, or you have just doomed yourself. You may be my son, but I will not condone this madness," my father said lastly, before walking out on me. I didn't know why he was making a big deal out of all this. I'm not letting Trisha go, period. I will have my ceremony and prove to him that he was wrong afterward. He should just wait and see. I had expected him to be happy for me, but here I was, listening to him try to dictate my life. Well, at least my mother was happy for me, and I know the pack will be too. It's a good thing I kept my relationship with Trisha from the eyes of the pack, or else I'm sure it would have reached my mate's ears by now. Someone like Cindy, who was delusional about being my mate and the pack's Luna, would have used that against her. In hopes of hurting her, I leaned back on the couch to take a brief nap, and that was when I felt that foreign presence again. But this time, I could sense saltiness in the air. Whoever it is was crying. I steadily stood up from my seat and tried to grab whatever it was, only to come back empty. The foreign presence was gone. I sniffed the air, but nothing. Not even a faint residue. I walked back to the couch and settled back down, only to be startled by a heavy knock on the door. I stood up to head to the door, only for Kiara to swiftly overtake me. I stood back and watched as she opened the door and squealed before throwing herself into someone's arms. She had changed from the clothes she arrived in and was now wearing a sleeveless top with ripped jeans and boots. I had to do a double take though, because I now realized that she also had tattoos. A few matching the ones on my mate's arms and others in languages and images I have never seen before. I didn't have to strain my neck to see who it was, because she pulled the person right in. My eyes widened when I took in the gigantic man standing in my home. He wasn't much to look at, but he was rigged in the right places and had tattoos littering the better part of his body that I could see. What was it with this family and tattoos? He had his bulging arm around Kiara's shoulder, and I was surprised he hasn't squashed her yet. Not that I would protest him squashing her. Nope, I would just turn a blind eye. He made himself comfortable before lifting his gaze from a smiling Kiara, who had been chatting his ears off in a language I didn't understand. His gaze settled on me, and after studying me for a moment, he spoke. I am Hephaestus, uncle to Kiara and Chaos. Oh, I'm Alpha River and welcome. I wasn't informed you were coming, I said, with a small smile as I took the seat in front of him. I was supposed to arrive tomorrow, but I wasn't busy today, and I decided to pass by. That's okay. Do you need me to get Chaos for you? No, actually. I came to see you. Chaos had always wanted her own personal library and training center, and her mother thought it will be nice to build one for her as a mating present. That's great, and I'm guessing you wanted the go-ahead to start building. Yes. Well, I have no problem. You can choose anywhere close to our home and start as soon as possible. Thank you. I will like to survey the land today, and my workers and I will start on it as soon as possible. Thank you rather. It will be a great surprise to give her after our mating ceremony. She will be ecstatic. She surely will be. Kiara cut in with a smug smile on her face. I pretended to not have heard her before, asking our guest if he wanted something to drink, and apologized for not asking as soon as he had arrived. He declined though, and asked if he could go out and survey the land right away. I offered to take him, but he said he was okay with Kiara, and that he needs to catch up on lost time since it had been a while since they had seen each other. I forced a smile on my face and nodded in his direction when he stood to take his leave. After he and Kiara had left, I sat back and tried to figure out what had just happened. The visitor's closed-off attitude towards me. I felt he didn't like me and was not impressed with me, but I couldn't figure out why. First, Kiara, and now their uncle with a weird-ass long name that I don't remember. Even though he told me a few minutes ago. I run my hand through my hair in frustration before pushing everything into the back of my mind. Tomorrow was my mating ceremony, and I was not going to let anyone rain on my parade. Not at all. Today was the day of the mating ceremony, and to say the pack was just happy will be an understatement. They were elated and overjoyed because an alpha's mating ceremony happens just once, and the blessings that rain on them on that particular day left remarkable prints and impacts on their lives for the rest of their existence. Alpha River was in higher spirits himself and couldn't help but celebrate in his own way. He spent the majority of the day with his high-ranked members and friends in the conference room, making merry and reminiscing over old times. Chaos stayed locked up in her room, trying to avoid anyone as much as she could, whilst Kiara stayed with Uncle Hephaestus, who had already started on her new home. A smile still found its way onto her face when she remembers the call he had given her as soon as he had left the pack. His precise words had been, "Princess, I'm sorry you were mated to that jerk. I don't even know why your father isn't doing anything about it. I honestly don't know how you put up with his cheating, lying self. I only spent a few minutes in his presence, and every word and smile he spoke or plastered on his face made me want to bash his face in. But then, I remembered you will give him more hell than I ever could, and I will just have to wait impatiently and enjoy it when his time is up." She had laughed that day because her uncle didn't like violence, and for him to condone what Chaos was up to, and even trying to take part in it, proved how much she meant to him. He was a man of few words, and emotions in moments like this ought to be treasured because they rarely happen. The smile, though, vanished quickly from Chaos's face when she recalled what she had witnessed last night. The conversation she had overheard between her mate and his father. She was glad that someone saw the absurdness of what her mate and his lover were doing. Her already frozen heart caked with more ice when she saw how her mate was nonchalant about the whole thing. She didn't ask for a mate, and she didn't ask to be treated like trash. What he was doing to her was wrong on so many levels. Disrespecting her integrity, taking her for granted, being made a fool of, a total mockery of her status, and premeditated deceit and abuse, both emotionally and mentally. She has always had a tight screw on her emotions, but when she heard the garbage that was spewing out of her mate's mouth, she couldn't help the tears that trailed down her face in agony. Havoc, her wolf, had been whimpering since yesterday, and was feeling restless. She was withering in the pain of her mate's rejection. Cadden had tried to reach out to her a couple of times, but she had blocked him off. Chaos's mind was made up, and so was her wolf's. There was going to be hell to pay, and someone better be ready to receive it. Wes, Chaos's, night came, and I felt as if tarantulas were crawling all over my body, both inside and out. My mother had called earlier to ask if I still wanted to go through with my mating ceremony, and when I told her yes, she gave me words of encouragement and to call her if anything went wrong. She sent a dress, though, through Uncle Hephaestus, and inasmuch as I didn't like this night, I totally loved the dress. It was made with cotton see-through lace, and it felt like a glove on my skin. The dress had sleeves that ended at my wrist with a low-cut front, giving a spectacular view of my cleavage. It clung to my body and put my curves and the tattoos on my neck and back out for display. It flowed from my hips and had 2 long slits on each side to showcase my legs. I was literally dressed to kill, and my mother really outdid herself. I sat in front of the dressing mirror in my and my mate's room trying to calm my raging nerves. I had just finished applying mascara on my eyelid and a rouge-red lipstick when Kiara walked in with a small smile on her face. She was dressed in a sheer creme dress that flowed from under her breast to her feet, with slits at each side and her hair in bouncy curls. Her dress, though, was sleeveless, which put the tattoos on her arms out on display too. We had a few matching tattoos. I got the view of the back of her dress when she turned to close and lock the door behind. The back of her dress, though, was cut out and ended on her waistline. The black flaming phoenix circling our family crest was splayed on the major part of her back, and I knew she was proud to show it, just like I am any time I got the chance to. We may not be the normal type of family, but we've got each other's back, and that was the most important thing. I flashed her one back before picking up a brush, only to have her snatch it out of my hand. She fixed herself behind me and started working her magic on my hair. "Do you still want to do this, Keone?" Kiara asked after a moment of silence, using my first name so I would know she was dead serious. "Yes, Kiara. I'm not doing it for my mate but for the pack. After today it becomes my pack and responsibility too, and I can't just up and leave," I replied softly. and I will be there with you every step of the way, my good friend. Just smile and fake your way through it. I know it will be over before you notice. Yeah, I guess, but I don't know how I'm going to react when it gets to the mating aspect of the ceremony. I don't think I can stand it. I know, Kay, but I'm sure the bond will make things easier for you. Once the mood is set, trust me, everything else disappears. Of course, I do trust you. I heard you and Matthews practicing last night. You guys are like rabbits, and you in particular never shut the fuck up. Chaos. Kiara, at least one of us is happy and having fun, but even if I pretend not to notice, you have his mark on your neck like a badge. Don't think for a moment that I don't notice how you have put it out on display. Shut up. Don't worry though, you will have your own personal badge before the day is over. And I will be there to remind you. Ugh, you are impossible. That's why. You love me, Kione. Of course. You psycho. Okay, enough. Am done with your hair and I can feel Matt reaching out for. Let's head downstairs and get this show on the road. Ooh, it is Matt now. I thought it was only for your late night practices. Oh, Matt. Ooh. Yes, right there, baby. Like really, Kiara. Shut up and let's go. Kiara snapped as she flushed red with embarrassment. Hand in hand, we headed downstairs and out to the training grounds, which now looked like a wedding reception. A huge stage was mounted in the center, whilst chairs with occupants surrounded it in a form of a circle. There were a few rows between the seating arrangements for passage, and a large one that leads straight to the mounted stage. I turned to look at Kiara, and after taking a deep breath, I let it out before nodding curtly at her. She took that as her cue and took a couple of steps forward before beginning her walk to the mounted stage where her mate waited with mine. I waited till she was halfway there before following after her. Now that I allow myself to acknowledge my surroundings, I heard their murmurs of awe, excitement, and confusion as I headed towards the mounted stage. Most of them wondered who Kiara is and why we both had tattoos littering our bodies. The most tentative ones went as far as to point the similarities we shared in some of our tattoos. And that was how it went till I got to the makeshift stairs leading to the top of the stage. My lovely mate. Note my rich sarcasm was there to help me up with a radiant smile on his face. He was bare-chested, with a pair of tight white jeans hanging low on his hips. So low that you could see his V-line. I flashed him a small one of my own when I was finally up the stairs and in front of him. He might have mistaken it for nervousness because he pulled me to his chest and after dropping a soft kiss on my forehead, he whispered into my ears, "Calm down, babe. I will be here throughout this ceremony, as well as Kiara and Matthews," not wanting to speak because maybe something else might follow. I just closed my eyes and nodded. I kept my face buried in my mate's bare chest throughout the official announcement till the real deal began. I lifted my face only to find Kiara and Matthew no more on the stage, but seated at the front seat directly in front of the stage beside a smiling Felicia. I chuckled softly when Kiara wiggled her eyebrows at me suggestively. I rolled my eyes before turning to face Gregory, who was sending me pity looks. And I knew just why, but now was not the time or place. I sent him a small smile before allowing my mate to pull me over to the small setup in front of his father. The small setup consisted of an aged earthenware bowl filled with moonstones and a knife beside it. I knew what was supposed to happen because I had read about it during my study about the different mating cultures we had around. It varied from pack to pack, and my mother made it a point to let me study it. But since I come from a pack with a different mating culture to this one, it has to be respected and initiated on behalf of my ancestry. And old pack. A compromise to keep both packs satisfied. Since my mate is the alpha male of our mating, we will adhere to their way of mating today, and mine will be done on the next full moon, which happens to be tomorrow. Taking a deep breath, I stuck out my right hand over the earthenware bowl and nodded at Gregory to signal my readiness. He took the knife, and before I could blink, he had already cut open my palm. It took everything in me not to wince because the knife had traces of silver in it. To prevent the cut from closing quickly, I could feel it. Clenching my palm, I allowed the blood to trail into the bowl. I watched as Gregory repeated the same actions on his son. And after he had also let his blood run into the bowl, he took both our palms and pressed the open wound together. The fusing of our blood nearly brought us to our knees, but we held on tight to each other. Havoc whimpered in agony as she felt the bond strengthening and clinging onto each other like a parasite. It was heartbreaking to know all this meant nothing to my mate. I blinked back the tears from my eyes and watched as blood trailed from our joined hands into the bowl. A flash of white light flashed over the bowl before it started sizzling. We watched as it burnt on the rocks, and the more it burnt, the more it gave off a refreshing scent. It smelt like our scents combined together. We held our clenched hands over it until our cuts healed, and the last of our blood rose from the earthenware bowl and wrapped itself around our clenched hands. It caressed our skin before seeping into it. It moved from our hands to our shoulders, circled over where our marks will be at the juncture between our necks and shoulder and the center of our chests, before returning to where it started on our hands. It took a different shape and embedded itself on our skin. My mate and I leaned forward for a closer look, and while I watched mesmerized, my mate smiled brightly as the picture of a moon with two wolves howling under it formed on our skin, and I knew why. It meant that the moon goddess has approved of our mating. Gregory took hold of our hands and lifted it up to show the pack that we have been accepted, and their response to that was to jump from their seats and cheer. It pays to close your eyes for a moment and pretend the world and its problems do not exist. Because then, life becomes a lot more bearable. Gregory allowed them to cheer to their heart's content before leading us to the end of the huge makeshift stage. And that was when I saw the smaller and shorter makeshift platform behind it. It wasn't the fact that it was there that surprised me, but the way it had been presented. In an actual sense, it looked like a bed. A large four-poster bed with sheer curtains surrounding it. It had what looked like rose petals scattered all over the pillows and the bedding. But I was comforted by the fact that the actual bed wasn't visible to the eyes of everyone. The huge makeshift stage did a wonderful job of covering it to the extent that only the curtains and the canopy of the bed could be seen. The little privacy was much appreciated. Wolf whistles and chuckles rang throughout the gathering. As we all knew what was next, the event I dreaded the most, the actual mating aspect of the ceremony. My mate growled as he saw me take a shaky step back. He bent down and scooped me into his arms, causing his father to laugh and the pack to cheer. I settled in his arms, accepting my fate as he walked off the huge stage and towards the small one. I felt the shift in him as his wolf made his presence known through his eyes, and the love and devotion reflecting through them did nothing to assure me. If anything, it just reminded me of how my life with my mate will be miserable. After this day and the next, I shut my eyes to avoid seeing them and started psyching myself. I pushed all the heartache and problems into the back of my mind and gave in to the bond. I needed to do this for myself. And Havoc, I asked her to give in to the bond, like I'm doing, and make the most of this mating ceremony, because it was going to happen only once. After I was sure she wouldn't kill our mate, I took a seat back and allowed her to make her presence known. I felt my back touch something soft. And that was when I realized we had gotten to our mating bed. I watched as Havoc flashed Caden. A shy smile, and that was our undoing. Firm lips descended on ours, sending tingles throughout my whole body. Our arms found their way around their back before fingers trailed softly into their hair. I was sitting back and enjoying the show, and the next thing I knew, I was back in control. I opened my eyes to find my mate also back in control. I closed my eyes and lifted my body off the bed to kiss him, to which he was more than eager to oblige. I let out a gasp when I felt his hand trailing up my thighs through the slit. My gasp had been an opening gate because his tongue found its way next to my mouth, tasting everywhere it could possibly reach, whilst his hands worked wonders on my skin. The feeling of euphoria washed over my body, and the bond as my mate left my lips and started sucking on the spot where my mark was going to be. I tugged on his hair with a loud moan when his canine scraped the sensitive skin there. I knew he was deliberately teasing me because of the blasted smug smile plastered on his face. When I opened my eyes to look at him, my fingers left his hair and trailed all the way down his back and his waistline. A smile found its way onto my face as the sounds leaving my mate's lips to reach my ears. Grunts and groans of blissful passion. I made quick work of popping the buttons of his jeans open, and without wasting time, my right hand weaseled its way inside. A shiver raked across my body when I touched the pulsing member in his jeans. It was hot and hard. I could feel the veins on it pulsing with life and desire. With my eyes locked on his, I wrapped my hand around it and squeezed. His eyes darkened with desire just as I knew mine had. I gave my mate a firm squeeze and tug, all the while biting my lips to stop the moans that have lodged themselves in my throat from coming out. My mate's response to that was to throw his head back and let out a rather loud, hoarse moan. I moved my wrapped hand up and down his member to create friction, but it seems my mate wanted more because he began bucking his hips into my clenched fist. His grip, though, tightened on me as he bucked his hips repeatedly, and then, all of a sudden, he stopped. I watched with furrowed eyebrows as he got off of me and sat on the space beside me. I was about to ask what was wrong when he tore off his jeans and threw them away as if it was keeping him from his meal, and in a way it was. A gasp left my lips when he turned to face me with darkened eyes and gold flecks swirling in them. It showed that his wolf was near the surface and was turned on as much as his human was. The heatedness of their gaze had me squirming under it. I tried to turn my head, but that was a wrong move because, in no less than a second, my very naked mate was back on top of me and held my head in both hands, so I had no option but to face me. He leaned in and gave me the softest kiss I have ever had the pleasure of receiving. It was filled with so much desire and love that it had my body thrumming with want and need. My mate let out a growl when my arousal leaked out like an open faucet. It was so heavy in the air that I felt like choking, and I was amazed by how my mate hadn't snapped yet and was still very much in control. But I was proven wrong when I saw sweat trailing profusely down his body and the almost feral look in his eyes. I burrowed further into the bed when his right hand found its way into my line of vision and his nails were replaced with claws. "You look beautiful in this dress," he said in an animalistic tone that had me almost convulsing with orgasm. "Thank you," I replied in a small voice. "Sorry," was all he said afterward before the claws came down on my dress. I heard the sound of ripping and looked down only to find my dress in shreds, and I was lying in my underwear. I guess my mate didn't appreciate them because they were next. His claws retracted, and he pulled all my shredded clothes away from the bed and to goddess knows where. I shivered when the cold wind swept over my body, and I couldn't help but moan when my nipples hardened. I reached a hand out to soothe it when I was stopped. A chuckle sounded when I whined in protest. "You tease me now." My turn, the same animalistic voice said, with amusement lacing his tone. I huffed in annoyance when both my hands were gathered above my head and to my uttermost dismay tied to the bedpost. I tried tugging my hands out of it, but it proved futile. It seemed to be entertaining for my mate because he just hovered over me and chuckled to his heart's content. Idiotic, dominant alphas. I stopped though, and tried to close my legs shut when I felt the cold nipping on my core. But like before another wrong move, my mate's gaze left my face and tied hands to trail down my body. His eyes darkened and heated more as if the way it was before was disturbing as it is. He had me moaning when his fingers started tormenting me. Trailing it from the collarbone, he ventured down to my breasts, to which he massaged, pinched, and tugged. My nipples hardened, and even then, he didn't stop till I was screaming with desire, asking for more. He stopped then, denying me of the pleasure I was dying for. He continued down my stomach and then to my navel before trailing downwards. He sat back on his heels before reaching for my legs and spreading them apart. I gasped and moaned when cold air danced over my core, but that wasn't enough for my mate because my knees were bent till my core was on display. My mate growled when he saw how wet I was. He trailed a finger on my core, tracing it and making it more sensitive than it already was. I screamed when he reached my clit and started rubbing it without mercy. I thrashed on the bed whilst trying to tug myself out of my restraints. But it was useless yet again, and my mate didn't relent on his torture. My chest heaved as I panted and tried to breathe even though it was getting more difficult by the second. I could feel my mate's heated gaze on my core, and that wasn't helping either. If anything, it made me wetter than before. I could feel my juices gushing out of me like a broken pipeline, and it was insane. I tensed when a finger entered me, but it didn't last long because another finger found my clit and resumed rubbing. I tried to close my legs, but it was met with threatening growls and harsh spanks on my thighs that I stopped trying. I felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at the least mistake. I tried to move away from the evil finger that was thrusting slowly in and out of me. I wished it will pick up speed, even if it was a little, but my sadistic mate just wants to torture the living daylights out of me. So I didn't even bother asking. Any time I moved back, the finger follows, but the rhythm of its thrust changes. From hard to deeper and slow to torturously slower. I could hear screams and loud moans, as well as chuckles and grunts and cuss words. I knew the latter part was my mate, but I didn't recognize the owner of the former. It took me a while though, but I figured it out. It was me. I sounded like a freaking banshee, and that made me flush all over. This torture went on for a while. I even felt tightening in the pits of my stomach and the urge to release and let go, but any time I would be close, my mate will immediately stop all his administrations and kiss me softly or suck on my nipples before going back again. This went on for goddess knows how long, but then I figured it was long enough because of the sweat that we were both bathed in. It glistened in the moonlight that had sneaked its way through the gaps between the curtains. A scream tore from my lips when his evil finger retracted itself from my body, but only to return with 2 more siblings. I felt full, and my body tried to prevent them from going any further. Hell, I felt like my core was being torn into pieces. My mate leaned towards my ears and whispered words of comfort and encouragement into my ears, while his thumb rubbed on my clit slowly, easing the pain and loosening my tensed body. He showered my face with kisses and gentle caresses till he was sure I was lost in pleasure before his evil fingers started tormenting me again. The pleasure I felt before is nothing compared to what I am feeling now. It has all been tripled, and I could feel myself falling into an abyss of passion and desire. My body shook with the overload of lust and arousal it was receiving. I thought this was mad desire until I felt the fingers curl inside me and rub a certain spot hidden there. I screamed and bucked on the bed as my mate growled and kept rubbing against it without relenting. I tried to get the fingers out of me, but it failed. My mate only rubbed harder. I clenched harder against his fingers, but that only seems to excite him more. I took a last resort and tried to close my legs, but it also failed miserably that I wished I had never done that. My mate tricked me. The evil fingers were removed though, but only so my mate could spank me hard on my core and thighs a couple of times till I was leaking and shaking before he thrust his fingers back into me, and none too gentle. To my dismay, a fourth finger was added, and they made it their job to curl and rub that spot inside me, ruthlessly, as if to show me that what was happening before was child's play, and that it was my mate who was in control, and not me, and he could do with my body as he pleased. My lower body was quivering with pent-up and restrained desire. I was getting to the point of uttermost frustration, and I fear I would die if I didn't get my release soon.